this. So back to where I started. So I am what I like to term a lazy programmer. And as you can see, runtime, I always forget. When I'm typing, I always forget, is it runtime uppercase or lowercase? And then colon, add event listener. It's so long that being a very lazy person, I made myself a tiny little function called listen. Nice and short, all lowercase. I can remember how to spell it, and it's quick to type. Additionally, when you want to dispatch an event, the way you dispatch an event is something like this. You do runtime event, and then you create a table, and then you create a field in that table, and then let's say we want to dispatch the dinner bell event. Then we'd say name equals dinner bell. And then we can pass along some parameters, like let's say we give it the position of the player. So we go x equals 100. The player is at x100, and whoops, and y. Come on now, work with me. And y equals 200. And now, any functions or objects listening for dinner bell will get this event and be passed x equals 100 and y equals 200. But you can see that was super, super long to type. Now, that's why I have my shorthand notation, which is simply post, name of the event, I could type, and then my additional parameters table, x equals 100, y equals 200. Now, this doesn't seem much shorter, but most of my events are typically something like just an event name, and so let's make this one a little more normal for me. So normally, I would just pass a name for the event. So for the dinner bell event, I would have to type runtime, dispatch event, blah, 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 open parenthesis, close parenthesis, or bracket, close parenthesis. I mean, it's just long. I'm always forgetting the runtime upper lowercase thing. I don't know what it is, if I'm slightly, diminished capacity or what's going on there, but I just can't seem to remember. Anyways, post for me is much more straightforward. Another thing is I come from a different environment where post, listen, and ignore were the names that we use for our event dispatching environment to start with. So being familiar with that, SSK has listen, ignore, and post, and because I love them so much, I stole them out of SSK and put them in common. So, long story short, go ahead and go back to, where were we? Enemy? No, we were in player. Oh, that's the problem. We were over here. So now I have an event for the mouse that I want to listen for. Mouse is a known event. However, my code works with known events and arbitrary events. So I simply say listen for the mouse event and let the player be the one who is listening. And to do that, I use the trick that I keep talking about, which is I create a field called mouse, same name as the event, on the player. And what I'm doing here is actually I'm defining a function that this field will reference this function, and it's got all this code attached to it. So now, whenever the mouse event occurs, it'll say, the player object was listening for that event. Does it have a field called mouse? It does. Okay. Execute mouse, pass in player as the first argument, and pass in the event details as the second argument. And then, when that event occurs, we check to see, as always, is the game running? Is the player valid? Hasn't been deleted yet, or nothing bad happened. It's not been destroyed. Then I do a little shorthand. There's a number of variables in here, and at this point, if you want to learn what the variables are, you can go back and look at our mouse project, which is in a subfolder. It's under top-down shooter app, I believe 1 or 2. We did a keyboard examination and a mouse examination, so that's in there. But I extract the primary button down. See, now I love Corona, but sometimes I think they got these really super long names, and this is one of these cases. I mean, don't take this as this isn't an insult or something. You can't really avoid this because there's primary mouse, middle mouse, secondary mouse button, which is basically left mouse button, middle mouse button, right mouse button. So I pull out primary. I could have called that left, but I'm already using a variable called left elsewhere. And what this is telling me is it's either going to be true or false. In other words, pressed or not pressed. True will be pressed. And then I say, am I firing? Okay, I'm not firing. Initially I start off, and is firing is set to false. Is the button pressed? Okay, the button is pressed. So I'm not firing. The button is down. I set a flag on myself, is firing. I set that to true. I change my animation to be the base animation, but then actually I keep track of what the last animation was that is playing, because when I fire, I'm going to go from my current animation to a firing animation, and then I'm going to flip back to whatever I was currently playing. So if I was paused, just standing there, I'd be playing the paused animation. If I was walking, I'd be playing the walking animation. So I store the animation, whatever I was at last, and then I change my animation to shooting. And the enter frame code down here, which was keeping track of our walking, was also playing whatever our current animation is. So that's handled for us. And then I call the fire arrow function. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut out all this code. Actually, I'm going to set this to true and see if we can make this work. Okay, so let's go look at the fire arrow function. And shrink it down a little bit. Shrinky dink. Boy, this is quite a lot of code. Okay, so we call this function from player, and the first argument that gets passed in is a reference to the player, and then the second one is an argument that I put in for this show. And basically it's saying, if this is true, do some additional steps to show what's going on. And what those additional steps are...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So go back to the mouse code.
For sure.
Just kind of, I just want to make sure I'm... like you said, this is a fairly complicated piece of code, so I'm having a hard time hanging on. So I just want to make sure we recap everything for everybody so they know where we're going.
Okay.